Welcome to Season 2 of Healing the Tigress, a podcast of conversations and stories on Asian American Pacific Islander maternal mental health. We are your hosts, Peggy, a perinatal mental health therapist,
and Jasmine, a clinical pharmacist who is perinatal mental health certified. As Taiwanese American mothers who lived through postpartum depression and anxiety, we felt like we didn't hear about other AAPI mothers struggling with their mental health in new motherhood. But we knew it couldn't just be us.
So we created this podcast because we hope that sharing these stories can start to break the stigma of mental health in our community and help heal the inner tigress in all AAPI parents.
In honor of Veterans Day, we wanted to highlight a motherhood journey of a veteran who not only served her country, but now also serves the needs of so many mothers in their postpartum period. We've learned in our perinatal mental health certification training that military families experience unique stressors that can increase their risk of perinatal mental health disorders. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs reports that women veterans are at a higher risk of developing postpartum depression, especially if they have a history of PTSD. The incidence rates of postpartum depression among the U.S. military service women increased from 1.96 per 1,000 in 2001 up to 29.95 per 1,000 in 2018.
Our guest today is none other than Stephiney Foley, CEO and founder of Yuzi Care. She is a postpartum doula, Army veteran, military spouse, West Point grad, and mother of 2 biracial boys. Stephiney experienced both postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression after both of her pregnancies, and we're excited to have her here to tell us her story and journey of motherhood, from the military to Amazon to launching and creating a postnatal retreat center to support postpartum mothers. Stephiney, thank you for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit about your cultural background and what the timeline was like from when you were discharged from the Army until motherhood?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. And this is such a powerful platform, and I really appreciate both of you guys doing this. My name is Stephiney Foley. I was born in Shanghai and grew up in New York City. And I went to West Point for my undergrad and did about a decade serving in the U.S. Army as a U.S. Army logistics officer, deployed overseas in combat zones like Afghanistan and other areas. And I had my first kiddo in 2019, right before the pandemic. And then my second one in 2021, right inside of the pandemic, during the pandemic. So yeah, and during that time, I was working full-time as a product manager at Amazon, and we lived in Seattle with my partner.
Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah. You've shared on your website that you never expected to face postpartum depression. And during your pregnancy or prior, what were your initial expectations of what your transition to motherhood would be like?
Honestly, I didn't really expect anything. I think our society highlights how difficult childbirth is, but we don't really talk about how difficult the 4th trimester is, and just the next couple of years is, right? And so I think I just went into it with a lot of optimism and excitement, and I didn't outside of a birth plan during labor and delivery, I didn't really have too much of a thought process or framework around it. I knew, obviously from my cultural background, the concept of sitting the month, where the mothers are supposed to, kind of recover and have special diet that allowed her to produce milk and bond with the baby and just kind of recover both emotionally and mentally. I think, in America, we are, I think parents are really struggling now. And babies don't come with a manual. And it is such a pain point. And I think I see it a lot in our social media, as well as conversations, like daily conversations I have with mothers, and however they're arriving in their motherhood journey, whether through IVF, through surrogacy, through adoption, they're struggling. Mothers and dads are struggling. So personally for me, I really didn't expect anything. I was just like, oh, I'm ready to have my baby. And I didn't really plan for anything. I did have, my mom supported us for a short period of time, but that came with its own challenges too, due to a generational gap. So, yeah.
I'm going to jump in and actually ask, did you yourself do like a confinement period, that sitting month that you're talking about? You mentioned your mom was here, so maybe, I'm just curious, like, did you actually do that yourself?
I would say it was like a quasi sitting the month. I didn't really strictly follow it. For my first one, where I was looking for a USL or like, a confinement nanny that would be able to support our family. And I just really couldn't find one, to be honest. I looked and I just kind of gave up, and I didn't think it was that big of a deal. And I felt like, in my life, I've done a lot of hard things, right? This was not going to be any other challenge. I was going to treat it like an engineering problem that I can solve and resource plan and delegate. I think my in-laws and my mother, my parents came, like they took turns. I had a checklist of what they had to do for the family, who's going to walk the dog and etc. But outside of that, I did not expect the postpartum experience to be so difficult.
Mm-hmm. A lot of what you're saying is like, I feel like mirrors a lot of the feelings I had, where it was like, childbirth is the hardest part. And so you sort of drop the ball and everything after that, because you think like you mentioned, the culmination point is that childbirth. And then afterwards you sort of like, oh, it'll come. I have motherly instincts or whatever, that'll kick in. But that doesn't always happen. And like you said, we don't really talk about what happens afterwards. And especially maybe even in Asian culture, like I feel like it's, we hide that so well because we want to seem like we're doing so well. And there's like shame in not being on top of things. Right. So
totally.
Yeah,
totally. I think it's not just an Asian culture. Like if I think we posted some of the stuff on our social media, on our TikTok about, mothers, like getting the help that they need. And a lot of the comments, I read through all the comments, and, some of them are super encouraging, and like, mothers need to support each other, especially with the onset of 17 diapers. Like there's a lot of conversation around mother deserved a support. Self-care is baby care. That's actually our model. But then there's a group of mothers and women, or just parents out there that's like, well, it's a very natural thing. We've done it for thousands of years. You should be able to handle it. And there's nothing unique about your experience that you can't handle. And so I think as a society, I think we need to recognize how difficult postpartum is. And especially in this day and age with so much like information overload, right? Like everything's AI, but like, is AI really going to help you like hold your baby? I think it could do other things, right? Like maybe potentially create, like we actually have some stuff on the roadmap that is leveraging AI technology to support, the planning and the overall family formation and support. But I think at the end of the day, there's just an overload of information.
Yeah. And it's interesting, that comment of people being like, oh, people have been mothers forever, but this modern motherhood, nuclear family, mothers really weren't meant to mother in isolation. And that's what most of motherhood is right now. Like even you trying to find a confinement nanny and not being able to find one. And you did have the support of your mother, which again, you said came with some difficulties, but truly what was culturally, historically, it's been in groups with many mothers and aunts and other kind of like that village that there was like, oh, it takes a village. It literally was a village. And what motherhood now is often done in isolation.
Totally. And I think that's why, the commercialization of that support became a thing, right? Like, I think the rise of doulas shows that, because essentially it's that mental and emotional support, and that even that physical support, to help you through that period. And the scope of a doula is, we're not medical providers. We are, just emotional support, right? And to help you guide and provide some, high level educational content, and support you where you need it. But I think you're right. It's because that village no longer exists. And I mean, personally for me, my parents are, across the country, and they were here for a short period of time. And, once you have the kid, it doesn't just end in the first month. It continues, right? And so where is our silent village?
And it's interesting that the confinement is usually that first month, because we learned in our PMHC training that the onset of most of the perinatal mental health disorders is actually later. It's like usually after that 6-week OB appointment. I think Jasmine, correct me if I'm wrong, it was around like 3 months, right? 4 months is I think where the onset is.
I can't remember the exact number, but I feel like in my head, I'm thinking like actually like 6 months is like peak, like where she may show up. So it's very sad that actually, and I mean, Peggy's a therapist, but, even in the diagnostic manual, there is no diagnosis for postpartum depression, anxiety, these things. The qualifier is that it's within, the pregnancy period or within 4 weeks of delivery. And that's not enough. That's not enough to like classify that. And even like the whole 1 year postpartum thing, we've talked about this before in other episodes, but that's also not a great cutoff to say, okay, after 1 year, you should be fine. Off you go. You can't have you can't have depression anymore. It's been a year. That's also inaccurate, I think. So
completely agree.
Yeah. It's so tough, especially when you're trying to like kind of put in a box what people are experiencing. And postpartum depression is one of the only ones that you have in the DSM. There's not postpartum anxiety, postpartum OCD, like all the other ones that people are experiencing. And speaking of postpartum anxiety, I found it really fascinating that you distinguished in your journey. It was your first experience with your first was postpartum anxiety. Yeah. And then your second was postpartum depression. And I always tell my clients anxiety and depression are like two sides of the same coin. They do go hand in hand. But having experienced postpartum anxiety with your first, what do you feel like you did differently to prepare yourself for your second? And how did you cope with postpartum depression juggling 2 children?
I did the thing that I would not tell my clients to do or our guests to do, right? Just got through it. And I think to be quite candid, I don't think I didn't know it actually. I mean, I didn't know I even had it, until afterwards, I would say like 3 years after my second. I think that's when I realized I like took a step. Like, I think once I got into the field and just realizing that, oh my God, those were the symptoms I had. And, I think during the first, I think it's very natural for you to have anxiety, especially if you're an anxious person. Like, I've always been like very type A, and so like my anxiety was due to really just unknown. Like, I knew how to do certain things, but I don't know how to do it. And I think like preparedness can really resolve some of that. That's why I think, Yuzi is so important, because a lot of this stuff is preventable outside of the hormone stuff, obviously. But I think also just recognizing, hey, postpartum period, like it's the biggest hormonal drop and change that you'll have in any, stage of life. More critical and more like, drastic than menopause. And menopause, it's hard enough, but we just didn't even know that. I didn't know that until I got into this field. And I think we need to talk more about it. And I didn't know I had it. I mean, like my husband and I like talk about it nowadays and we're like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, remember that one time you did this? And I was like, yeah, that's not normal. That's not who I am. I'm on medication right now, and to really support me, and, continuous with lots of therapy and just, work on myself, and just trying to figure it out. I think it took me a really long time.
What was like the moment where you were like, or what was like the thing you looked back on and you're like, oh my gosh, that was very classic anxiety, or that was very classic depression?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of lit that light bulb up for you?
Oh my God. I might get a little bit emotional because, I actually wrote about it on my LinkedIn, and social platforms. The reason why I decided to do this and leave my corporate role and really dedicate my life to this, for this part of my life is, I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, and I was driving, and I had already worked 100-hour work week that week, and my husband was still working. It was 9 o'clock at night. My kids weren't falling asleep. I had a I think a 5-month-old at that time, and then a 2.5-year-old at the time. And I just remember loading them up in the back of my RAV4 and driving them an hour and a half, from Seattle to Tacoma. And Seattle's a little rainy. And they were crying, I was crying. And then in that split moment, I, was like, what if I just end it all right here? And I caught myself. Sorry.
It's okay.
Thinking back, I still get really emotional because, I think more people should talk about it and know that this could happen to anyone, even no matter how strong you are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, especially, it's okay. I mean, especially since you've been in the military, people think you should be tough as nails.
Totally.
You've been, right. And maybe even for you have to have that mindset to think I should be stronger than this. What's wrong with me? Right.
Totally.
I think so. I mean, many moms already feel like that. I think that they think I'm a mom, and by default, inheriting that title means I should be strong. For you, you have that extra layer of I've been in the army.
Right.
Nothing should faze me, right?
Yeah. And interestingly enough, when you're pregnant, when you're in the military, you're actually coded as a disabled person. You are, it's essentially like a mark on your record. You're not a full soldier when you're pregnant. And so my friends actually make fun of me. I remember going kayaking, at 8.5 months pregnant on South Lake Union, because I'm like, oh, it's fine. I'm very tough. I'm very strong. And I think you just don't expect invisible, injuries from what you're going through.
So after that sort of realization and moment, you mentioned you were on medications too. When did that enter your journey? If you don't mind sharing.
Oh gosh, no, not at all. I think I would say that story, that split moment where I was like, I think I need help. It took me probably 2 more years after that to get help, because I was like, I'm fine. That was just a split moment. I'm just tired. I was making excuses for myself, right? I was and I remember, I think a year later after that incident, I went out with my girlfriends to go bowling, and they were just like, how are you doing? And I just started ugly crying for no apparent reason, by the way. And I still didn't get help. I did not get help until 2.5 to 3 years after my second son was born. So pretty recently, actually, because he's only 3.5. And so I think a lot of, especially American women, I think being Asian American women and being an Asian American military veteran woman, there's a lot of added layers of just shell, right? I'm constantly just trying to like gut my way through things.
And I'm wondering, in terms of like resources, right? There was a report from the Wounded Warrior Project that show female veterans are more likely than their male counterparts to experience moderate to severe symptoms of depression, PTSD, anxiety, but they encounter way more barriers when they're actually trying to seek care through the VA for gender-specific care. When you were sort of experiencing these symptoms, what was available for you in terms of mental health care, and how easy was it for you to access that?
Oh boy. I think the resources are there. I think one part of it is, I think one, myself not recognizing it. And then two is, it does take a while. I think the stories that you hear about the VA, and I think they want, they want you to go on the VA campus, the hospital, to receive treatment and to, really, like have a comprehensive plan through them. And sometimes I think, I think for a lot of military women, after we transition out, like that environment may not feel the safest. And you don't actually realize that. And so you're just like, okay, like, can I get, some kind of support? And then it just kind of delays it. And then you're like, well, they're delaying it. Then, and then life gets busy too. And so I think it's a combination of both. I think in my specific use case, like I probably delayed it myself for a while, and then the system takes a little while to propagate and work. And so, yeah, I think that's what resulted in the long cycle.
Yeah. And a few times you've mentioned that you had to kind of tough your way through it. And like, I wonder if there's even this culture. And I have other female veteran friends who similar, they're like, I know I need to see a therapist, but like excuse, which part of it is like, I don't know, I'm just going to tough through this. I'm going to tough through this. And so there's also, you're right. The self barrier of, it's not that bad. I can get through this until it gets really
right.
tough, right?
I mean, I think I reached a breaking point, and that's when I really took it seriously and got help. And I remember trying, actually. I remember talking to a psychiatrist, and I remember having a therapy session, and I kind of like snuck it in between meetings, right? And I remember having like anxiety being the session with her. And so I never saw her again. And so I actually picked up the session with her like 2 years later. And so, I think it's just, it's very difficult. And I think also being Asian American, there's, you don't talk about that. There's not that recognition that, hey, like, there's a mental health crisis in America, and that mental health is a thing in Asian culture. And then on top of that, the military, right? And so it's just a lot of added layers.
And it's interesting because I'll tell clients sometimes too, like therapy will bring up stuff, and that it'll take a few sessions. In the first few sessions, you might feel worse before you feel better, and that can be hard for someone who's like, I just want to get better, and you go into something you've never done before, especially with the added layers of culture and military history, and being like, I just opened up all this stuff to you, and now I feel anxious, right? Like it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. And it's you got to find the right fit too. Not every single like therapist is going to work for you. I think your lived experience, like I think, can that other person empathize or understand what you went through? I had a tiger mom. Like when I say that, do you know what I mean? Right. And so, I think those are barriers to, really seek help. Yeah.
I want to pivot us a little bit. You got to share, and thank you so much for sharing. I know there's a vulnerable story of those moments that really kind of eye-opening for you. Clearly, it was eye-opening enough for you to do a whole shift career-wise. How did you decide? I don't imagine from that night on you went home and you just like,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe you did, but how did you decide to transition from the corporate world, going from corporate baddie into postnatal care world? And I mean, you were a product manager and now you've got all these other things to add to your list of things. How did you even go from that to like postpartum doula? Like, how did this shift happen?
Yeah, I think a lot of introspection and then just talking to a lot of mothers. I talked to hundreds of mothers in my network and people not in my network. And I put myself out there. I started writing on different social platforms. And, I think people came and just shared in droves of their experience. And I learned too, because I learned that there's postpartum can manifest in so many different forms. It comes in rage, it comes in psychosis, it comes in, OCD. There's just all type of ways it shows up. I don't even think it's limited to just women. I think men also go through it, but this whole topic is underfunded, under-researched, and understudied. And so how do you expect the general public to really understand, right? Like, I think there needs to be an understanding. And so I did a lot of groundwork to really understand what mothers are feeling. And I think it was a calling. I remember sharing this concept with an investor, and he's also Chinese American, and he's like, I was explaining to him, and I was so passionate about it, and he's like, oh my God, this is your 使命, like, which is like your calling, your like, what you're meant to do. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, like this is. And like, he's like, you changed as a person to like, when you're talking about this and how passionate you are in helping mothers and support them. And I think just over a period of time and just, more conversations with my husband, like, and he's like, absolutely, with his support, I dove in. I went to Bastyr University to learn about like what doulas do, what the scope is, and got my certification. And so I think I just really care about this and really want the world to look differently for the next generation.
Yeah, I've never heard that Chinese word before, but it reminds me in a couple episodes back, I talked about the ikigai, which is the Japanese concept, similar of like, this is your reason for living. And I love that because I feel like I had a very similar like epiphany where it's like, oh, this is the community I'm being called to work with and support.
Yeah. Your raison d'etre.
Yes. There's a word for it in almost every language, right? Yeah.
Every language. Yes.
Yeah. So then Yuzi Care was born, which from what we know about it, I know you've explained there's even more to it than just the postnatal care centers, but that's kind of the thing that really stands out first is that it's inspired by these postnatal care centers that are regularly used in Asia, and which is also kind of based in this confinement support type of culture. What are the things that you've seen in your research before starting Yuzi Care specifically about the outcomes of mothers in Asia as a result of this level of support?
Yeah, I mean, like, personal anecdote, I just remember like I was postpartum and my like cousin was postpartum as well, and she's sitting in one of these postnatal retreats in Shanghai in the Four Seasons. I don't think I showered in a week, and she had like a blowout and like a massage. And like, there's someone that's helping her with lactation while I had literally like a mental health breakdown in the parking lot of the Lidl Center, which is where we get our lactation support in Seattle, because I couldn't find parking. And, like when you go get lactation consultation, you have to kind of like make sure the baby's hungry and you have to be a little bit full. And I was like, just like, where do I find parking? How do I deal with this? There has to be a better way. Right. And so, I really just dreamed about it and like really meditated on it. And, that's like the postpartum retreat is the initial ingress, I would say. And at like even at the beginning of forming the company, I've framed it as I want to be a postpartum brand that transcends geographic bounds, that supports families in a meaningful way through technology. And so I think the postnatal retreat allowed us to validate a demand both from the caregiver side as well as the customer side, the consumer side. And it just, yeah, I mean, I think it's just a beginning, right? I think we need to build out, like, I think on our, like, my vision is to build out the largest maternal care network. And that really like supports them, and not just OBGYNs, like, and midwives, but that extends to pelvic floor PT, dietitians, sleep consultants, doulas, massage therapists that focus on postpartum or perinatal, pains, right? Therapists. I think there just needs to be something like a database that consolidates everything, that makes it easy for families to access. And it's interestingly enough, a lot of our guests, a lot of our reservations actually come from dads, where they're like gifting this to their families. And we have actually started in-home care as well. And so the dads are like a very participatory aspect of the whole journey, which I find so beautiful. And I think that's where we differ from the Asian experience, where it's mostly just the mom, and which there's nothing wrong with it. But I think being a feminist, I think, and my husband too, he wants to be as much involved as I am. If anything, he did more as I was struggling with my own mental health during this period.
I'm curious, you draw upon a lot of Asian inspiration for the beginning centers like that you had. And I had actually shared in our very first episode on this podcast how my experience with like a modified confinement actually wasn't very helpful for me. It might have added like an extra layer of stress that worsened my postpartum depression.
I agree.
Just so many different, conflicting like Eastern versus Western things, right? Does Yuzi Care incorporate elements of traditional confinement at all if someone wants it?
Yeah, I mean, I echo your sentiment. I think my anxiety was rooted in the differing child rearing tactics between how my mom thought and like what I thought. And I don't like, and then that just created more conflict, right? And then that added unneeded stress and strain on our relationship. Yuzi does. So there's a lot of, so the name Yuzi actually is a derivative from the Chinese word yuezi. So if you take out the E, yeah. Noise. And so there's a lot of inspiration that we draw from it, like the foot bath, the food that we try to focus on. We bring seaweed into the meals, right? And then there's, there like a lot of rest. There's the concept of, being like 5 days in the bed, 5 days around, like off the bed, and then like 5 days around the bed, right? And so like we try to really encourage our families to do that, but also mixing Western like themes of a family-led experience. Like a lot of times it's not just the mom that's coming, it's the dads too, and they're like they want to learn as much as they're there to try to like help with lactation, and we're like, well, maybe you can hold her hair or something. But I think I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of beauty in blending cultures. I don't think there's a one size fit all for you know anyone. I think we're in this day and age where we have chat gpt and large language models. Like, we should be able to provide personalized care, both from a service perspective as well as a tech perspective.
Right. And when you mentioned like the dads coming to, I remember one of my stressors was always thinking like my parents would bring traditional confinement meals. And I'm thinking, does my husband have to eat this, or does he even want to eat this? Now I have an extra thing I'm thinking of, like, how am I going to feed my husband? Or are you going to bring food for him too? That's, different or whatever. So it sounds, I kind of like this idea of the blending because we can't have everything like in one style or not, and also just solely focus on the mother, because the mother also thinks about everybody else in the family.
Right.
So if they're taken care of, everyone's taken care of, then she can actually finally relax too, right?
Right.
And so I'm wondering, like, then does Yuzi Care, like, how do you guys take care to evaluate and be mindful of the mental health of mothers in your centers?
Yeah, we actually have a perinatal mental health specialist, and she, so it's part of the experience. Each guest, if they want to have it, we actually set them up with a 30-minute kind of intake and just do an assessment, right? I think, and if there's signals, then like they should be aware of that. And yeah, that's how, obviously that's very near and dear to my heart. And one of my inspirations for starting Yuzi Care. But yeah, I want to make sure that's included. Mm-hmm.
What I love about your vision for Yuzi is it started as a postnatal retreat, but now it's all things, how are we supporting postpartum or even perinatal? Like it sounds like also like, how do we start this journey from pregnancy on? And it's interesting because like before I left the corporate world and went back into mental health, I had I met with a product manager friend of mine and I was like, how do I make this into a solution? And her biggest thing was like, well, who's going to pay for it? Right. And she was like, and I think that's the thing that has been so hard is in Asia, at least I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is kind of is it covered by their healthcare system? I'm not sure.
It depends on where in Asia. In Korea, part of it is covered. In China, it's not. I think they get some, it depends on where you are. You get maybe a stipend, but a lot of it is cash pay, actually. I think there's a perception that people just like bake it into the family formation balance sheet, right? They're just like, hey, like I'm going to have a kid. Mm-hmm. Like, this is what I have to set aside money for, just like how you would have to plan everything else. I think it's not super common yet. I think we're at the initial stages of this industry. And I think mothers are just starting to get awareness that they need to take care of themselves. There was a recent incident with a labor and delivery nurse in Boston. I think Lindsay, I forget her last name, but Clancy. Yeah. And, she's works in labor and delivery and 3 kids, and I think we need to take it seriously. And so I think our country needs to like understand that, and insurance companies need to really pay attention to it because it's good for them too, right? Because if they cover preventative care like this, and then ultimately they decrease the cost that's coming out of their pocket on readmission. And I think our government needs to pay attention to this too. I think postpartum care industry is like fertility industry like 10 years ago. And now companies are covering fertility through Carrot, Progeny, or Kindbody. But I think we're at the beginning of postpartum care because the bounce back culture is not normal. Like, we can't expect women to just like go back to work immediately. There's like, so much to it that I think Europe does it right. Like, they give them a year of maternity leave and
Canada too.
yeah, and supports them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like another
Mm-hmm.
anecdote, like I had a colleague at Amazon. She was from oh my gosh, like Germany, and her husband's from France, and they worked at Amazon. They were just in Seattle for like like a stint, like a 2-year stint. And we were having this conversation over dinner. She's like, I don't understand why you guys have so many pumping rooms and like, and like, and like why do they we don't have those in Europe. And I was like, well, it's a good thing. Well, because her and I actually we went to a trade show. That's what it was. And she was calling out that there were all these like pods, and even in Amazon offices there was these like pumping rooms. And I realized, and we both came to the conclusion it's because women are expected to go back to work immediately, but in Europe, they're not. And so they don't have the need for a pumping room in those workplaces because they don't rush the women to go back. Even the men they take, that's why like it's a family event that they are really focused on prioritizing their family's health. Yeah. So I thought that was really interesting.
I also wonder, are they more open to public breastfeeding as well?
Yeah.
So is that why they have less pods too? I don't know. I'm not sure if that's a thing.
But they're also not, if you're expected to like nurse for up to a year, and now the recommendation is 2, but if they're not going back to work before that 1 year, a lot of them are probably like preparing to wean by then, or even by then the baby isn't needing as much like breast milk. And so
I never thought of that either.
When you were saying that, I was like, oh, I never thought that these other countries don't have lactation rooms because they don't need it. There's whole industries here to have like I forget what the name of that one. There's like there's like the pods, Mamavar or whatever.
At
like
the airports, right?
Or like the companies like Milk Stork where they're just you're right. There's whole commercializing, right? Of like getting the milk to the baby because moms are going back at 6 weeks. It's just like instead of solving it on like a policy level, they're like, let's just put a Band-Aid on it. More pumping rooms, more pods, more ways to get your milk to your baby when you're traveling for work or whatever.
Yeah.
I would be curious if you could like change the landscape on a more institutional systemic level. What does that postpartum package look like? If you could just like run the world or run the country and be like, this is my solution, every mom should get blank, what would that be?
Oh, wow. So it's funny. I literally asked my chief medical officer this question today. She's a board certified OBGYN, Dr. Ashley Hedge. And it was, everything that she was saying, I was like, yes, this is exactly what I was thinking. And I think it's a combination of, the support, right? Like it's like, hey, after you give birth, like what kind of specialist do you need? Like maybe a lactation consultant to your house, or if you want to opt for a third place, like Yuzi, like a postnatal retreat, then everything is all together, right? Or the other option is if you prefer to be at home. Everybody's different. I don't think we should expect, like, even though I have a postpartum retreat, I don't think that it's suitable for everyone. Some people just want to stay at home, and I totally understand that. But it's the fragmented industries of like looking for care, like discovering it, finding it, vetting it, and then booking it, right? Like, do they even have availability? So it's like, what I would like to see is a platform where they can go for that consolidated care, and that maybe AI can help solve that. But I think the other piece is, so the first one is access, right? Like like consolidating the fragmented marketplace. But the second piece is cost. I think this needs to be covered by insurance. And this needs to be provided as an employee benefit, or somehow I think a tri model makes sense where, the employer pays for a third, the employee pays for a third, and then, out of their HSA or FSA, and then, the government pays for a third, right? And like policy that allow us to have these personalized care, like lactation consultant at home, like someone that can support you with like laundry, with food, dietitian, like that can talk to you, like a mental health provider that can support you. And because you get 16 visits when you're like about to give birth, and then you get one after, and that's 6 weeks. And I asked our chief medical officer, I was like, how long is this? Like, I mean, I personally had this appointment too, but she was like, yeah, it's 15 minutes and you're covering contraception, you're covering everything. And you're basically going down the list. And how personalized can that be? And like, how do we expect, and that's it, right? Like you don't see your OB afterwards. And then we're relying on the pediatrician, the family doctor to be like, Mom, how are you doing? While your kid is getting their like vaccination. And that's why mothers are not okay. And I think like probably like that, like those shows on, I don't know what channel, but like Snapped, like when women just like snap, it's probably because they're hormonal and they're going through like something really tough. And like my mom shared this with me, I think before I had, like, she said she had something very similar, but or like my great grandmother as well, because she had a miscarriage. Actually yesterday we were talking about it, and she was like, everyone thought she was crazy, but she's not crazy. She was just grieving. She had a lapse and she was fine afterwards, but everybody already deemed her like insane. But she was grieving the loss of her child. And I think we need to be more empathetic. Mothers need to give ourselves grace. We need to help each other. And I especially appreciate this platform because you guys are bringing this topic at the forefront. And it's so important that we talk about it and make this known that, we can't just expect women or even like just parents to bounce back immediately after such a significant life event.
This idea of like a one-stop shop and have all your sort of therapists and specialists in one spot. A few years back had posted this, just like a little graphic, an idea thought that I had. And I said, and it got a lot of resonance. And it was basically saying that we need to have a department called postpartum. It's like going to radiology or going to cardiology. Like, and this department should have everything related to baby and mom, right? Whether it's getting your therapist before, this is prenatal, but like before you deliver, right? You have your pelvic floor therapist, you have your, maybe you have your pediatrician there to embed it in with them or somehow so that it's the lactation consultants, like everyone there. But that's your department. Like that whole thing is one department, not
that's your village.
Fragmented pieces. Exactly. And that would be amazing. And everyone was like, oh my God, we need that. Like, that's what we need. Why don't we have something like that? Whereas, so it's kind of like our healthcare system now where everything is like, kind of like scattered, right? And this is, the most life-changing, like, moment of women's lives, and we just expect her to have that 15-minute OB visit 6 weeks later and here's your contraception. Bye.
Right.
We need to do better.
We really, really, really do. And I think we need to speak up about it, make it a priority and speak up about it. Like, if you work for a big company, like ask for these benefits, right? Like come to me, come to a company like Yuzi and be like, hey, we want you at Amazon. We want you at Microsoft. We want you at Google, and advocate for your benefits, right? And really support each other too through it. And I think just more education around it for both women and men. And
I love your comparison to the fertility world, because now there's so much more access to getting fertility treatment. And I think also part of it is because more and more people are needing it and seeking it out because of whatever reason. Like we've had doctors on the podcast who are like, oh, it's like 1 in 4, right, Jasmine? Like 1 in 4 female physicians deal with infertility, because like now we have more and more women who are having babies later. And so I'm wondering if, as we, all of us, all 3 of us and more, are bringing more to light the issues of postpartum, depression, anxiety, all of it, if that then it sparks a new movement of like, let's normalize that everyone needs access to this type of care.
Yeah. I think there's a trickle effect there too, right? Because women are having kids older. Like I had my first kid at 34 and then second at 36, right? And so like my mom's not that young, like she can't do like night care or anything like that. And so we are now caught in the panini generation, right? Like we're sandwiched in between the the boomer generation and then like, you know, our kids that we have to take care of. And it's really hard on us. I mean, like that's why there's a mental health crisis across the board, because honestly, I mean, I know the Surgeon General came out with that thing that was like, parents are not okay. It's because they're not okay. But what happened? Like, who's doing anything about it? And, you know, we just have to keep going. We have to keep pushing and keep advocating for these things. And I hope more and more postnatal retreats pop up. I hope more and more like people get trained as doulas and more people get trained as lactation consultants, because from all the conversations I have, they're really hard to find and they're cost prohibitive. And they're not cheap. And so why are they not covered across the board?
Well, especially if you're also like suggesting that we want everyone to breastfeed and you're not providing that sort of support. We want women to work, but we're not providing childcare. You know, like it's kind of like that whole contradictory thing where it's like, this is your recommendation, go do it, but like impossible hurdles to go over to actually accomplish that. So yeah, and I think also there's this shift in, I think now it's sort of shifting the mindset of women that like they have to do it all, that they have to carry and weather it all. And I think we're slowly heading in that direction where women are realizing that they do need to take care of themselves. Because if they don't, they're the pillar that falls down and the whole family system collapses, right?
Totally.
But I think as our generation, and especially I also think as Asian Americans, like we're, you know, starting to strip down those layers of also that cultural buildup, the idea that we just need to like, you know, suck it up, like just, you know, it's cool, right? Like it's like that's and that's so like, you know, reverent, like just like, you know, people like worship others that can do that, right? That it's like, oh, it's such a great thing you can do that, but why should we have to? Like it's and I think that's also the other shift towards that mental health piece that, you know, we're really starting to value more.
Yeah. And I would say like from an employer perspective too, like, you know, I think I would say if you're an employer, if you're listening, you know, I like giving like leave is not enough. It's almost like, hey, saying like, oh, go get some rest after you get like, you know, after you break an arm, and you don't give them like physical therapy to like actually recover. And so it's like we need to actually give training and manual and care and support for them to heal. That's why a lot of like, you know, senior executive women leave the workforce, or even just women leave the workforce. I mean, there's other reasons like childcare and cost and all of that stuff, but it's really difficult. I think like we're asking a lot of our parents.
Oh, this was a really deep discussion that we got into. So thank you for that stimulating discussion. You know, as we're wrapping up, we always end with asking our guests, as a part of the healing process, since we are healing the tigress, what would your current self like to go back and tell your past self in whatever, you know, was maybe the hardest part of this whole journey? What would your current self like to tell your past self in order to heal her?
Wow. I would say you don't have to tough it out, right? I think that's been the theme. You know, really acknowledge, and give yourself grace, ask for support, because I think for me personally, you know, coming out of all of this 3 years after my second, like my friends and family are like, you could have just asked us for help. And I was like, oh, okay. like my husband and I, we didn't even think about it, because we're just like, he's also military. I was a military spouse. So like, we're both like, we got this, like, we'll tough it out. But, that's not normal. Like, that's not that's why the phrase, it takes a village. It really does. Like, we need to be there for each other, and we need to support each other through this. And yeah, that's what I would tell myself is get help earlier. Be nice to yourself. And really, and forgive yourself.
I hope that gives some of our listeners permission to, if they're being hard on themselves or kind of scared to take that next step towards help because they think they can just weather through it. It's okay to have help. Totally.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Stephiney, thank you for everything you're doing in this space for the mothers and families that you're supporting. Where can our listeners learn more about you, Yuzi Care? Where can they find you if they are interested? We will put it in the show notes, but just kind of you can let our listeners know.
Yeah, our website is yuzicare.com, yuzicare.com, and on social using the same name. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. And yeah, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you guys for doing this. So important to talk about these kind of things.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your story, and happy Veterans Day.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Healing the Tigress. The more we share these stories, the more we can help other AAPI mothers and partners. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to keep supporting this mission, please hit the subscribe button to the show and take a few seconds to leave a rating. An extra big thanks if you would also leave a review to boost our show visibility and help other AAPI folks find us.
You can also follow us on Instagram at Healing the Tigress, or even better, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Healing the Tigress podcast to support us more. Inside the Patreon, we will be offering more bonus episodes, sneak peeks, and a community for you to help shape our podcast too. Thanks for being here.
Healing the Tigress is produced and edited by Peggy and Jasmine.
Music for this show is remixed by Dr. Tony Huynh of Tony Mixes.
Our intro music is a cover of You and Me by Z Avi, played by our co-host Peggy.
Our outro music is a cover of Green Island Serenade, played by Jasmine's sister.
Cover art design is by Dr. Angela Chung.